Had a blast watching the few days of the 2020 World's Strongest Man competition and can't get enough of it and want more? Well, me too. But good news is I think there's plenty of analysis and stuff to unpack from what we saw, from Alexei Novikov winning the championship and setting the deadlift World's Strongest Man record, to Brian Shaw's subpar performance, to all of the injuries. There's just so much to talk about. So what I want to do is break down a series of videos into the most surprising things about World's Strongest Man 2020 and have them go head to head so you, my community, can help me decide which is the more surprising of the two events that happened during World's Strongest Man 2020.
Ciao, homie.
So today we're going to pair up Brian Shaw's subpar performance at the World's Strongest Man against the rise of Aivars Smaukstelis out of seemingly nowhere to put in a finals appearance and very consistent performance during this year's World's Strongest Man, as to determine which of those two is the bigger surprise to the viewing audience. So, first and foremost, how badly did Brian Shaw perform? Well, he was fifth, so, more people below him than people above him, so he didn't perform that badly for the average competitor, but he performed badly for Brian Shaw, a four-time World's Strongest Man competitor who was in the discussion for potentially winning his fifth championship this year, so definitely a disappointing performance to not even be on the podium. Let's give Big Law's Lawrence Chalet his credit, though. He predicted Brian to be fifth place in World's Strongest Man, and he was right. So let's give him his credit, but let's a little more quietly take credit away, because he picked JF Caron to win, and I picked him for third, and I was right and he was wrong. Ha 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 ha. Just kidding, buddy. I love you, Big Laws. So anyway, how bad did Brian Shaw perform? Well, I think the best way to determine that is to determine what the group should have and would have been when it was switched the first time. So, and we can argue that, right? Because it was switched twice. So we can argue that before switching at all was the right grouping or what have you. But what could have happened, let's go with that, is Alexei Novikov could have still been in that group, and which would mean Aivars Smaukstelis would be in group 3 instead. And so if Novikov were in Brian Shaw's group, he would have beaten Brian in the Farmer's Walk. He would have beaten Terry Hollands as well. So Brian would have come in third and would have had to be battling it out with Terry Hollands in a stone-off, which Brian would likely win. Actually, we have to see how he would do in the deadlift to determine the stone-off, so let's hold that thought for a minute. So now if we go down to the deadlift, Brian came in second there as well, but it becomes apparent to us and becomes divulged through any of you who have watched Martins Lisi's latest video on YouTube that apparently there was a pact between Brian and Terry that they would both tie for first place on this deadlift. Brian went first, and Terry, being a gentleman, stuck to his word and did as many reps as Brian and stopped, looking like he could do more. Martins kind of showed, I think it was Martins' video that actually showed the small clip of this happening, or he showed the small clip of Terry's sixth rep at least. They weren't allowed to film very much, but he showed a little bit, and Martins is definitely the guy who divulged this. Although I did see some people commenting on YouTube about this a couple days ago, so I don't know how they found out ahead of time, but apparently that seems like it might have happened, which I get from a standpoint of let's conserve our energy for the events that are to come, but from a standpoint of integrity and let me give my best and give my all to beat the guys in front of me, I find it a little fishy. So I hope it's not true, but, I haven't ever heard of Martins to be one to lie, so it seems like it is. So anyway, again here, taking the hypothetical scenario that they wouldn't have made that last change to the grouping and Novikov were still in this group and Smaukstelis not, Novikov would have destroyed both Terry and Brian. Because as I understand it, Brian did as many reps as he could and Terry matched it, and Novikov is 4 reps above that. That's the squat. So you may be kind of saying, well, they're not comparable, the squat and the deadlift. They're not. You're right. However, the silver dollar deadlift that Novikov and Brian Shaw both did the same event of in the finals is comparable, and Novikov set a World's Strongest Man record in that, and Brian Shaw was considerably below on that 478 kilos, so we can only assume when comparing the two men doing the same event that Novikov in this competition was a better deadlifter than Brian Shaw. And so here we would have had Novikov coming in first in this deadlift, and then either Brian or Terry coming in second. I'm going to say Terry because Terry seemed like he stopped before he was done in that video clip. So Terry and Brian would end up second and third respectively. And then we said up here, Terry and Brian would have also ended up second and third respectively. And so then they would be, in fact, moving into qualifier day 2 to see if it remains that way and see if they have the stone off. So now we go to qualifier day 2 to see how that manifests itself. So let's go there. And so qualifier day 2, we have the farmer's walk. And so now we go to qualifier day 2. And so there we have the loading medley with the monster truck parts. Here Brian Shaw came in 4th. So again, if the groups were as they were before the last change and Novikov were here instead of Smaukstelis, Novikov actually was slower than Smaukstelis in this one, but still better than Brian Shaw, so I think that doesn't change anything, right? Novikov would have come in 3rd here, and so it would have been Stoltman... Sorry, 2nd. It would have been Stoltman, Novikov, Terry Hollands, Brian Shaw. So he would have remained 4th here. And then in the dumbbell clean and press, if we had Novikov here, who did the same dumbbell clean and press medley that Brian did, Novikov did 1 fewer reps in this one. So Brian would have remained number 1 here. Novikov would have been 2. Stoltman would have been 3. Terry Hollands 4 and Nick Best 5. So it seems like putting Novikov back in would not have altered day 2 at all. And so it wouldn't have altered day 2, but it would have altered day 1. So then if we go back to day 1 and look at the points, Brian Shaw at the end of day 1 was at 8.5 points. And that is, again, how we figured that out was because of 4 points on the first event. And then a tie for first, so 4.5 points on the second event. So if we're changing that to say Brian would have come in 3rd here, he would have gotten 3 points for the farmer's walk. And here, he would have had 3 points. So instead of 8.5, Brian would have had 6 points on day 1. Going to day 2, we're saying this would not be altered. So for day 2, Brian had... This was his 2-day total, 15.5. And so Brian would have been 2 points less than that. He would be 13.5 instead. So instead of winning the group, if Novikov were in Brian's group, Brian would be tied for 3rd, although Smaukstelis wouldn't be here anymore. So now you would have Novikov with 17 points here. Novikov would be in 1st in group 5. Terry Hollands would be in 2nd. Brian Shaw would have been in 3rd with 13.5 points. Hollands and Shaw would battle it out for the stone off, and Shaw would win. So the point of all that analysis was to say that Brian Shaw still would have made the finals with Novikov in his group, but by a much slimmer margin. He would not have won the group. He wouldn't have had this, whatever it is, 12 years in a row of making the finals and winning his group. That streak would have been broken. And he would have, and by all rights should have, looked even worse than he did if not for a last-minute switch out of Novikov from his group. So then we go into the finals, and we see that finals results, Brian Shaw is this row here. So Brian gets 4 points on the loading medley. He's not the fastest guy, especially not compared to like the likes of Novikov, for example. And so not a big surprise there. Keg toss, he got 8 points. I expected him to win that. He didn't. Log ladder, I expected him to do a lot better on this. Again, I think we get fooled, and I mentioned this to one of the people who was so kind enough to come comment on my videos on my channel and interact with my community, that I think I got duped a little bit because Brian's training is a lot more visible on social media than many of the other athletes. And so we see that he bought Hercules pillars and he bought a bunch of logs of increasing weights and trained all this stuff, right? So you think he's going to have a distinct advantage over everybody. And I think part of the problem is we don't see what everybody else is doing. They may be doing the same thing or more training on these implements. And so we get fooled into thinking he has this unfair advantage, whereas, you know, somebody like Novikov, whose explosive speed could make up for all that, and he might well be training the same stuff. I mean, you know, going forward from this point, I'm going to be paying close attention to all these competitors' Instagram, so I will have a much more informed position on my videos going forward on what they're all actually doing. If they do in fact share it, they might not all share it, but you know, for sure, I think that's kind of an illusion, right? Like you see one guy training and you think he has that advantage, and that's the approach I took that backfired a bit. So log ladder, super disappointing for Brian. Deadlift, a little disappointing for Brian. I expected Jerry Pritchett, JF Carone to do better. Novikov was a huge surprise to everybody, especially winning by that margin of weight. And we'll talk about that in a future video, if that's a bigger surprise than some of the other surprises. And then Hercules hold again, like Brian trained this, he bought pillars, he trained, and like he's like middle of the pack or lower in point standings. So, you know, I don't know if he had a focus problem or again, it's just an illusion of we think he has more of an edge than he does because he's more public with his training, and really in reality, like every other athlete, he's slowly declining as he ages, which is to be expected and takes nothing away from a remarkable legacy that places him probably number 2 all time right after Zaviscus. And so Atlas Stones, Brian does fantastic. You got to hand it to him for coming back at the end and giving his best effort to the very end and succeeding in an event that he's really good in. And so again, making the case for, was Brian's subpar performance a big surprise? For me, yes. Like, for better or worse, whether I was fooled by all the training videos or not, I was surprised. It was his placing did surprise me. If we go back to the original predictions I did, which I should have on here somewhere, I had predicted Brian to win World's Strongest Man. And even going into the finals, I was still predicting him to come back and win because I thought he'd do great in the Atlas Stones and the Hercules hold, and it just didn't come true. So for me, huge surprise. Now, we want to compare that to the rise of Aivars Smaukstelis. So let's go over and take a look at some videos. So here's Aivars' Instagram, and I gotta admit, I never heard of him before this competition. So I start digging into him a little bit. He is the World Strongman Champions League champion of 2019. This is actually his 3rd time competing in World's Strongest Man, so he isn't nobody. He's very much somebody. Take a look at this. Look at all these lifts he's doing. Double dumbbell right here. The guy's done it before. Maybe a surprise to all the other guys, but not to him. And so, oh, sorry, that's a World's Strongest Man of this year. So that's him doing it this year. My bad. But anyway, here you go. Giant truck pulls. This was the most impressive photo to me on his Instagram. He's doing like a soccer trick with an Atlas stone. This is insane. So what I'm trying to say is I looked him up, and he's really impressive. Here's the Wikipedias for the 2018 and 2019 World's Strongest Man competitions. And so if we look for him in here, let's find his heat. And so he was in Heat 5 with Mateusz Kieliszkowski. So, you know, totally understandable he didn't win that heat in 2018. And he came in 4th, so he still did better than Nick Best and Terry Hollands. Then we go into 2019, and so in the 2019, we try to find him again and see where his heat is. And he is now in Heat 3, just under Martins Lisi. So he does considerably better here in that heat, right? And then he ends up he actually does just under Martins is better than Tom Stoltman. So Aivars Smaukstelis is very much somebody in the strongman community and very much celebrated and accomplished. So I just want to make that point. And if we go down here, the last man standing stones is what I referred to earlier in the video, where I actually found another YouTube video about this. I should probably go find it and credit it for you in my description so you can go check it out, where they go head-to-head on the stones. I won't show it here for time purposes, but I'll credit it in the description so you can check it out. It's an awesome video. And Aivars is really like staying with Tom till the very end. I think Tom did a 9th stone that Aivars just couldn't get up, but like that's a crazy number of stones. So just trying to give you a sense for what this guy has accomplished in strongman. And, you know, nobody could pronounce his name this year during World's Strongest Man. Who is this guy? And I'm here to tell you, he is somebody. He has lots of accomplishments. And what he did for this year's World's Strongest Man was an incremental improvement over what he did in the last 2 World's Strongest Men competitions, not an out-of-nowhere performance. And if we take a quick look at what those performances were, again, he was in Group 5 with Brian, so Farmer's Walk came in 3rd right after a living legend, Brian Shaw. Same in the deadlift, 1 rep less than a living legend. And then if we go into qualifiers day 2, we take a look up here, and he comes in 1st in the loading medley of a set of monster truck parts that confused everybody, that everyone was thinking, how are we going to not, stab ourselves to death with the edges of these things? How are we going to lift these? He ends up winning his group, and if I look across all the groups, it looks like only Tom Stoltman did it faster. So amazing performance by Aivars Smaukstelis. And by the way, that's how you pronounce it. I've heard him in a video pronouncing his own name. The SM is pronounced more like an SHM, and the accent is on the first syllable, so it's Smaukstelis. And so then we go to dumbbell clean and press. Okay, not as great of a performance for him there, only 3 reps compared to Brian Shaw's 9, but not so far behind Luke Stoltman's 4 in 2nd place. And so then, when we go into the finals, he ended up like 8th place overall, which isn't, 7th place overall, which isn't great, but it's not horrible. He beat Adam Bishop, Kevin Ferris, and Graham Hicks had to withdraw, of course, but Adam Bishop is a well-regarded strongman, especially in deadlift and some other things, and Smaukstelis came in ahead of him. So you got to give him credit for that. So this is actually 7th is where I had him predicted. The actual results, he came in 8th, sorry. So he did come in 8th, but he beat Luke Richardson, Europe's strongest man. So we got to give Aivars some credit here. And, just go through. So the loading medley, not great, 3 points. Keg toss, 7 points. Like, that's a lot of 10 is the maximum, right? He did great. Log ladder, consistency, another 7 points. Deadlift, not great. Hercules hold, not great. Atlas stones, decent, So, compared to these other guys, he did pretty well, right? He didn't do horribly. And so, wrapping up this whole discussion about what was a bigger surprise to us during the 2020 World's Strongest Man, the subpar performance of Brian Shaw, the 4-time World's Strongest Man in pursuit of his 5th, or the seemingly rise out of nowhere of Aivars Smaukstelis to make the finals and perform decent in the finals, I gotta say the more surprising of the two, the subpar performance of Brian Shaw. Aivars Smaukstelis did not, in fact, come out of nowhere. Anybody who was paying attention knew who he was and knew he was a force to be reckoned with. Just mildly surprising that he made the finals. So I would say mildly surprising that he made the finals and Robert Oberst didn't. But yeah, much more shocking to me that Brian Shaw came in 5th and for most of the finals was even lower than that and had to fight with the Atlas stones to even get to that point. So, after we went through this whole analysis, let me know what you think of it. Am I full of it? Do you have a different perspective? Which of the two situations do you think was more surprising in the 2020 World's Strongest Man? The subpar performance of Brian Shaw or the seemingly rise out of nowhere of Aivars Smaukstelis. So if you like this video and want to learn more about any of the products I described during this video, make sure to check out the links in the description below. So if you like this video and haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing using that button right there. And also stay tuned for some other videos that you might love blooping up right there. This one is the one that YouTube thinks that you will like the best, and this one is the one that I think you will like the best. As always, share this with everyone, and until next time, ciao, homie.